You're listening to the Cereal at Midnight podcast. Hello and welcome to the Cereal at Midnight podcast. My name is Heath Holland, and this is a major episode for me because I am talking to a living legend in this podcast. We're sitting down with Donald M. Morgan, the cinematographer behind so many movies that you know and love. He's a multiple Emmy Award winner, so many awards, so many great films. John Carpenter, worked with John Carpenter on multiple films. So the Elvis biopic in the 1979 with John Carpenter with Kurt Russell. I worked on that film. He worked on Christine. He's the cinematographer of Christine. How many of us love this movie? It is the quintessential evil car movie. It's an amazing film, and it is shot so beautifully. We talk about that in this interview. Starman. He also worked with Kurt Russell on Used Cars. This is a man who met Elvis. He met Walt Disney. He was born in Hollywood. He was a rodeo rider, a race car driver. A life so packed with events and connections with people and stories. And you see these stories are so close to the surface. Let me tell you how this happened. So I was able to, well, there's a new documentary. The documentary is called Cinematographer. I'm holding this up if you're watching the video version on YouTube. The Cinematographer is directed by Dan Asma. And it's the story of cinematography, the importance of cinematography, which is it's an unsung area of filmmaking. I feel like, we love directors and we love stars. We talk about these things, but the cinematographer is such a vital part of the team, the filmmaking team. But sometimes we don't talk enough about that. This is a documentary that really seeks to point out the importance, to show the impact of a cinematographer, but also to tell the story of cinematographers, especially Donald M. Morgan, who is a man's man who has done so much to not only, aside from his interesting career, just what he's done for other people, the kindness. I'm going to tell you guys this too. So there's stories that came up. I cut about 30 minutes out of this interview because it was meant to be off the record. But a lot of these stories that I had to cut are in the documentary. So if you like this conversation and you're like, well, what's he talking about that didn't get put in the final interview? A lot of it is in this documentary. It is so well done. Kudos to Dan Asma for telling an incredible story about incredible people, an incredible man. And it's Dan that kind of set this whole thing up. So Dan is here in this interview. I'm talking to Dan Asma, who is there sitting next to Donald M. Morgan. So this is a bucket list for me, you guys. This is such an honor. And to have Mr. Morgan here and to be so sharp, he was 90 years old, okay? So you will see my respect for him. I only address him as Mr. Morgan because that respect is earned. I tell you, I have nothing but admiration for Mr. Morgan, and I'm so grateful for him to just sit down and talk to me about his life and about his experiences. Could have talked to him for 8 hours. Maybe we'll get a chance to do it again one of these days, but I don't want to take too much time with this introduction, so I'm going to go ahead and cut to the interview. Director Dan Asma and cinematographer Donald M. Morgan. Well, Mr. Morgan, what do you think about the documentary?
What do I think about the documentary? I think he did a hell of a job myself. I would have liked to have seen a little more of me in there, but
Dan, were there things that got left on the cutting room floor? I imagine this was a pretty hard one to edit because you've got all these legends and these great stories, and you've got to streamline it into this narrative. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, it was there's a lot that ended up on the cutting room floor, we'll say, so to speak. And I think a lot of that was just these incredible stories about Don's career. Mm-hmm. And actually a lot of them coming from Don himself. I mean, what's great about Don is he's got such a great memory, and he's had such such an incredible kind of history working on these films that, you could just put the camera on and let him roll. And about like 8 hours later, like the camera battery will die and Don will still be talking. But I mean, honestly, a lot, there were great stories. It was just a matter of figuring out what was the kind of what I hope would be kind of considered the most important stories, not only for film students, but also kind of fans of these movies and fans of cinematography. And that was the goal, to figure out what were the best stories to be able to keep. And then maybe do a sequel later with the other stories that we have.
Well, it is so much of Mr. Morgan's story. And the thing that was interesting to me that I learned through the documentary is that, Mr. Morgan, you didn't necessarily set out to be a cinematographer. You didn't have this great love of movies. You wanted to be, race car driver or a boxer or something like that.
When I was really young, you got to remember, I was born in Hollywood, California. So I wanted to be a bronc rider in the rodeos. So there's not too many Hollywood. They might be on television or the big screen, but not too many real cowboys. But I loved horses when I was young, and I just was crazy about riding. And when a couple times I went to rodeos, I thought that's what I want to do. So I always picked stuff I failed at, And after many years of getting hurt and banged up and the crap kicked out of me, I decided maybe I ought to do something more sane, like be a race car driver. So then I sold my wife's car and bought an old race car. And when I say old, that automatically shows you where I finished and everything. So my son used to say, "That's my dad leading the winner of the race," which means you're being lapped. I tried to get him not to tell that story too often, but it got a lot of that. But anyway, I flipped a race car back east, all the way down the back chute, went over a guy's wheel, and just one thing after another, banging myself up. And the reason I got into cinematography is that a friend of mine said, "What are you doing now?" And I said, "I don't have a job right now." And he said, "You're always looking for excitement. I've got a friend that has a helicopter mount and he does helicopter work. How would you like to maybe talk to him? Maybe you could be his assistant or something." And I had already worked in film labs and I did some animation. My dad was an animation cameraman, and I did some animation for a while, and I didn't like any of that stuff. So I went over and met with this guy whose name is Nelson Tyler, and he built a thing called the Tyler mount that was very, very sophisticated. And when I met him, he said, "You and I used to play together when we were 5 and 6 years old." And I said, "Are you sure?" And he said, "Yeah, your dad and my dad worked together." And so we had a little bonding right away. And he gave me a chance to be his assistant. And that's how I got into aerial photography. And I really never thought that I would get into lighting and doing all that stuff. I just thought I'd hang out of a helicopter because it was exciting and what I like to do. Am I telling you too much?
No, you're telling me this is great. I just want to listen. No such thing.
I was going to say, Heath, there was one thing I had read a review about the documentary that did say the one thing they felt like there was missing was Don's father was kind of a Disney animating cameraman. Do you think it'd be good for him to talk about that?
I'd love to hear about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe you could share that.
Yeah, my dad was an animation cameraman at Disney. He started in film labs, and that's where I started. He got me a job through some connections in a film lab, and I didn't do very well. In other words, I got fired a lot. It just was too boring to me to sit in the dark room doing that. So then he went out on the limb again and helped me get a job. Or actually, I knew a connection that knew my dad, and I told the guy that I would really like to be an animation cameraman, which is as boring as being in a lab, film lab. It's just, you just sit there and do one shot, you do 50 little moves and then click a camera once and then start all over again. And that's never been my style. I like excitement. And when I got to hanging out with Nelson Tyler doing aerial stuff, I realized that I wanted to be a cameraman hanging out of that chopper instead of him. So I hustled a couple of jobs on my own that didn't pay much, but wanted somebody to do something cheap. And I knew how all of, you zoomed in, you zoomed out, you focused with these, and you sat on a thing that called the munge mount, and it took the vibration out of the helicopter. So it was really sophisticated and really a really nice thing. And he used to let me ride out from the helicopter port to the job. He'd meet me there. So I was always playing around. I always had the pilot, hey, follow that car, will you? And they knew I wanted to be a cameraman. So I got pretty fair at it. And then I got a chance to shoot something. And the guy liked it. And then Tyler couldn't show up for a job one time, a big job. And the helicopter pilot said, I don't have a cameraman now. And I said, yes, you do. You got me. And he said, no, I'm not taking a chance on you. And I said, you and I do this every day. You just put me where you want me, and I'll turn the camera on and we'll get what we get. So he took me up for a big job up in the mountains. It was snowing up there, or it had snowed, and it was beautiful contrast, between the bright looking car and all that. So they loved what I did. And I showed it to Nelson, and he said, you're not supposed to have the car push the frame line. you give it a little bit of a lead. And so he gave me some tips, and then I started shooting. So there's big chunks of that missing, but that's the theme.
Did you, when you were young, did you ever get to meet Walt Disney?
I did.
How was he?
Well, I only met him once. My dad worked at Disney. He started out at the studio over on Hyperion. That was the old Disney. In fact, they still have part of it in the new Disney. When you go through there, they have a room or two. I forget how much they kept of it, but it's the old studio. And my dad had a motorcycle, and we lived at the beach. And he brought me out to Burbank to the new studio, and he parked out in the parking lot, and we got off the motorcycle, and Disney was just getting into his car, and he said, hi, Max, to my dad. My dad's name was Max. And he came over, and my dad said, Walt, this is my son, Don. And he patted me on the head and said, hello, little Max. And he never called me Don, but hello, little Max. And I've never forgotten that.
Wow.
I did meet him, and that was the only time.
Okay. You've met a lot of people. That's something that comes up in the documentary. And I was just like, man, the stories. You met Elvis at a time when he was, was it Stay Away Joe that you were, what was the film that, yeah. Could you talk a little bit about meeting Elvis? Because this is an area, this is a period, Elvis was hard to get to. People may have seen him on stage, when he returned to performing, but to get close, to get inside that mafia, the Memphis Mafia, what was that like for you?
Well, I don't even know that it impressed me that much at the time. I cherish the thought of it now because, I did a movie called Elvis with Kurt Russell, and till this new one came out, it was the best Elvis that I think was ever made.
I think it still is, in my opinion.
I do too. I agree.
Yeah.
I'm not that much a fan of the new one, but I do. I thought the Kurt Russell one is amazing. Sorry, go ahead, Don.
Well, the Kurt Russell one showed more with the dad and the, you know, some of the real life stuff. And but anyway, we went over to do some aerial stuff that had nothing to do with Elvis, just some aerial. I forget even what the shot was, but they hired Nelson and I was the assistant. So when I got there, the cameraman said, "Could you stay a few days? We need somebody to slate." They were a second assistant. They were shy one guy. And I asked Nelson, I said, "We got anything going?" And he said, "No, hang around. It'll be good experience for you." So I stayed there. And I think the most memorable thing that happened while I was there was I was sitting in the car they drove him in. It wasn't his car, but the car they drove him back and forth in. I was sitting in that car waiting for something to do, and they were off busy. And the Elvis bunch, some of the guys and Elvis came over and got in the car while I was still in there. And they're playing grab ass and having a good time and kidding each other, you know. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, Elvis Presley and Don Morgan? Yeah, what do you think? So it was pretty exciting. I actually, one time Barbra Streisand's agent asked Nelson if he had anybody that could go over to Las Vegas and shoot the sign of him appearing and pull back and show the town, just a real quick shot. And it was a little too mediocre for Nelson to do it. So he said, "Would you like to do it?" And I said, "Oh yeah." So when I went over there, they had the Elvis sign up there. And we were supposed to have Barbra Streisand on there. So they said, "Don't worry about it. We're going to change it. But we have to wait till later on at night. You know, we still need to show that Elvis is still here." So anyway, I waited around and they said, "Do you like Elvis?" And I said, "Yeah," you know, and I told the guy, I thought it would impress him that I'd worked with Elvis, you know.
Yeah, sure.
We were like this.
Yeah,
you know?
right. Yeah. He was in your car.
Yeah, Elvis jumped in my car and messed around. Anyway, he said, "Would you like to come back and see, maybe bring your wife or whoever and see Elvis on stage, his act?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, I'll give you front row seats." So on his comeback tour, I was in the front row seeing that. So that was also exciting.
Wow, that's great. You worked with, so Kurt Russell came up, and you've worked with Kurt Russell several times. I have a lot of admiration for him as well, but I was wondering if you could share your maybe some memories or some stories about working with, you know, maybe starting with Elvis. There's a good transition to Elvis working on that project with Kurt Russell.
Well, I'll tell you, Kurt Russell and his father was in that. His real father was Presley's dad in the movie that I did.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh,
So I worked with the dad and Kurt, and I really had a good time with Kurt. He's a very friendly, easygoing guy, and he didn't have too big a head, and you know, we had a good time. And he even asked me to go hunting with him one time, which I turned down.
He's a hunter?
Yeah, he loved to hunt, but I've just never been a fan of sneaking up on something and blowing its head off unless it was a real person, you know.
So Heath, do you know that? So it's not in the documentary, but there's an interview where Don talks about the first movie he worked on with Kurt Russell was a movie called Amber Waves. Have you ever seen that movie?
I've not seen that. No.
I can't remember. I've seen it a long time ago, and I don't know if I remember if I like the story, but it's a beautiful movie. Yeah.
Yeah. Amber Waves, TV movie, 1980, directed by Joseph Sargent. Let's see if I can find the actual date.
Yeah.
March 9th, 1980.
I thought Amber Ways was before Elvis. So, okay. No, now I know.
Well, what's interesting there though is that so Mr. Morgan worked with Kurt Russell in 79 and then again in 80. So the question is, did he want you there, or, how did that happen?
Yeah, how did that happen? That's a great question. That's a great question.
Well, what happened was, part of it was that we'd worked together, and the other part was that I think he was an influence to John Carpenter.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's true or not, because John and I'm trying to think, without my credits and looking at them, I don't know which I did first. I think I did. I think the first time I worked with John Carpenter was on another film, and then he picked me to do Elvis, which I was very surprised, because he had another cameraman that he was really tight with, and he picked me, which was to my surprise and my happiness. It was great.
Don was a cinematographer on one of my favorite horror movies of all time, which was Christine, because Christine is just so badass, and that is such a great villain, and the idea of this devil car and the way it was shot just was so beautiful. And
original. What about Christine is all the movies I've done. I did Starman with Jeff Bridges, and I did a couple of things that were memorable, but nothing holds up like Christine. 3 or 4 years ago, about 5 or 6 years ago, the guy that owns a Christine that runs it around the country and shows it at different places. If they have a screening of the movie, he'll bring the real car that he's got. And he asked me if I would go and sign CDs in Burbank at a bookstore. And I did. And I had no idea. And then they brought the car over to Bob's Drive-In, and people were just couldn't get enough of it.
Yeah. People.
So
it really
so about 3 years ago, the guy called me and he said, would you be interested in, we're having the 35th anniversary of Christine. Would you be interested in us flying you to New York and being a part of it? And I said, absolutely. And so they flew me to New York. The guy that put it on owned an antique collection of cars, and he had this big building. He owned half of the block in New York that we were in, and he had one of the cars, and they had a screening, and then they had question and answer, and they had myself and all the actors that they could get, and we had quite a deal. And they said, now, Don, we know you're pretty friggin' old, but you can't die for at least 5 years. And I said, why is that? He said, because we're going to have the 40th. We got the 35th, and we're going to have the 40th, and we want you there. So that's the reason I'm here. I'm not dying. I was going to die, but I'm not going to now.
Good job, Don. Thanks, man.
Well, then you got to stick around for the 50th, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Don, so how old are you? Tell Heath how old you are.
I'm 90.
Amazing.
I'll be 91 on February 11th.
Wow. I am so grateful that you're talking
great.
to me.
And I think Don would go out and shoot another movie if he could.
Yeah.
The opportunity, he'd shoot something tomorrow.
We should talk about the mentorship. How do we want to talk about it? You had an alcoholic incident. You had an airplane incident that is recounted in the documentary, and you changed course and you've never gone back. and you've also been a sponsor to so many people. I want to talk a little bit about that because I know a lot of people have so much respect for you, not just for your work, but as a sponsor, as a man, as a mentor.
I do help people with drug problems and alcohol problems, and I've been around for a while. I've got 56 years of sobriety, and the only reason that I got sober, I'd been to some meetings and I met people that were sober, and I thought, yeah, that's a good way to go, but not for me. I've got so much life that I could give it. Anyway, I just couldn't get it. I'd go to hang around with these people, but nothing clicked for me. Till Nelson sent me on my very first job. I think it's in the documentary. They sent me on my very first job, and I'm in first class in the airplane, and I was trying to stay sober for my then ex-wife, now ex-wife, actually. So I was trying to stay sober a little bit to keep her off my back, and I wasn't doing a very good job of it. I'd stay sober for a while, and I dabbled in drugs, not a whole lot. I never stuck a needle in my arm. I would have, but I was afraid to. And I used to kid, my mother used to have all kinds of pain pills and this kind of pill and that kind of pill. I used to raid her when I was a young kid. I'd raid her little stash, and I took whatever I could find. I'd probably eaten my doll. But it calmed me down. I really felt that.
It helped your cramps.
Didn't help hers, but anyway, Nelson sent me on my very first job without him. I was to go to back east and meet a New York cameraman and show him how the mount worked, and he was going to shoot this, and I was going to be the assistant. And I got $100 per diem. Well, I don't think I'd ever seen $100 bill. And I had $100 per diem, first class ticket, and I'm flying back east. And they come by with the little cart and they said, "Mr. Morgan, would you care for a drink?" I didn't want to hurt their feelings because I'd never been called Mr. Morgan before, And I said, yeah. The wife's way down there and I'm way up here. Who's to know?
Right.
So I got a drink and then another a drink and another a drink, as many as I could pour down. Then when we landed, I went in the bar and got loaded, went upstairs, passed out, puked all over the bed, and couldn't make the call on my very first job on my own. And the phone rang and they said, "Mr. Morgan, we're sorry we didn't pick you up, but it's raining outside and we can't do the helicopter shot today."
Mm-hmm.
Huh?
Mm-hmm.
So I had the
Man.
big guy on my corner, I
Yes,
guess.
indeed.
And anyway, they said, "Could you stick around and do it tomorrow? It's supposed to clear up." And I said, "Yeah." So, whew, close one. And so I did the job the next day, and everybody was happy. Then they flew me down from where I was to somewhere in Florida, and I was supposed to show a rental house how to put the mount together and where all the wires went and blah blah blah. And the guy said, "Hey Don, would you like to go have a few drinks?" Totally forgot what just happened. Yeah, sure. So got drunk on the second deal that he sent me on. So I finally got through the night, and the next day I'm going to the airport to get on this beautiful plane, first class ticket home. to a job that I may not have anymore because of my behavior. So I came back and he didn't hear about any of it. So I made up my mind. That was November 5th, I think it was 1966. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's right. 66. So I was 69. That's 3 years. Yeah, that's 66. Yeah.
So anyway, I made up my mind. You can't drink on these jobs. You're not gonna last. This guy won't put up with it. Because Nelson was, we used to go have a drink with him and he'd drink 2 sips out of a beer and go,
Yeah.
no, I'm starting to feel it.
Come on, man.
Anyway, never had a drink since November.
That's
5th,
remarkable.
66.
Yeah, he's been sober 3 years longer than I've been alive. Good God. Well done, man. Well done.
Mr. Morgan, you've won so many awards for your work. Do you have a favorite of something that you've done? Something you've shot?
Well, each one's a favorite while I'm doing it, you know. I think I did a lot of very personal stuff with Joe Sargent, which never made it to the big screen. It was always movie of the weeks. But he always had such depth in the stuff that he did, you know, Miss Evers Boys, and we did
Lesson Before Dying.
Lesson Before Dying, and we went
Amber
to
Waves was him as well.
Yeah.
we went and did the movie about Auschwitz,
But I thought it's
Out of the Ashes.
Out of the Ashes. That's it. There you go. Got it.
Yeah, that was really a. We did that in Vilnius, and a lot of the guys went from where we were over to where the real ghetto was, but I never went. I wish I had it now, but Christine Lottie was the star of it. She was magnificent.
Yeah, it's a great movie. Yeah, it really is.
Do you like working in do you prefer film work, theatrical film work to television work? Is one more appealing than the other?
Well, you know, the sad part about doing television is just the word television turns off certain people. And I always like jumping back and forth, doing a feature. If I liked content, not what it was going to be shown on, I like content. If the story was meaningful, you know, I did I think 9 or 10 movies with Joe Sargent, who was always the best. And Roger Young, I did 10 or 11 movies with Roger Young. Those were the top-notch movie of the week guys. And I just couldn't say no to a really good project. I didn't go, oh, it's going to be shown on television. I'll be, you know, and there's a lot of people in the ASC, they put me up for Lifetime Achievement Award. And they said, the group said, we can't let him have Lifetime Achievement Award. And they said, why not? They said, he's a television guy. So that they started, so they could give me an award. They wouldn't allow me to get that one, which makes no sense to me. I mean, if you have a body of work that people think is awarding, what difference does it make? But there's always that, oh, he does television.
Yeah.
You know, and oh, he does features.
Yeah.
And I think that's blown out of proportion.
Yeah.
I wanted to work. And if the project looked like something interesting, I'd do it. And I never said, no, I can't do it. This is television or whatever. But the award committee, they agreed that they wanted to give me some recognition. And they gave me the first Career Achievement in Television Award. So I was the first one, and they've had, I think that was in 07 or something like that. And they've had one every year now. So it's part of the deal.
Well, I do. I mean, and I'm sure you know this already, Heath, but what I kind of love about this story is that, you know, that playing field has been completely leveled, right? Meaning the pandemic has completely turned that world upside down to a point where some of the best content now is for television. And you know what I mean? So, you know, for so long, like this kind of almost weird discrimination about, oh, things on television aren't as good. And yeah, I mean, I understand it going through the 70s and 80s, there was this kind of real sense that, you know, oh, theatrical projects, you know, it's just more glamorous or whatever it is. Well, I mean, honestly, what I love about Don's philosophy on this is, look, it's all about what's the good story. And also, I've got to make a living here, right? So, hey, I'm gonna go to jobs that are gonna be able to pay me too. But what I love is how in time this has gone completely around, and to a point where I feel like, you know, it certainly took the pandemic, but now more than ever, you know, some of the most talented filmmakers and artists that are alive today are working in the medium of television and streaming, to a point where I actually find I'm not really going to theaters very much. And most of the friends I know aren't going to theaters very much, because there's a sense of like, well, I don't want to deal with the guy down the, you know, 2 aisles in front of me who's blowing his nose, or the kids up here or being loud, when I can just stay home and watch content that is just as good, if not better, in my living room. And here's the other thing. If I have a TV and a sound system big enough, I'm not missing that kind of that experience. You know, everyone's like, oh, you want to be able to have that big, huge experience. Well, I've got a really big damn TV.
Yeah.
And if the filmmaking is good, that's all that really matters to me. So
yeah, well said.
There's still some discrimination.
oh yeah. Oh, I believe that. I do. I believe it.
It sounds very political, like the old guard wanting to keep the gates closed.
Because I've had cameramen that I admire said, Don, why are you still doing TV stuff? I said, because it has good content. The stuff that I'm doing, I believe in. You know, I've done some TV movies that never made it to the big screen that ought to have. You know, that it was that Out of the Ashes, to me, was just mind-boggling. The stuff that went on in Auschwitz that was real. This stuff wasn't made up. This is stuff that they knew happened. Babies piled up outside that they aborted and threw in a pile, and all that kind of stuff that we showed in that movie. Anyway, I can't change what opinions that people have of TV or features, but I just wish that we were smart enough and wise enough that a guy like myself or anybody else could go back and forth and not worry about, you know, I know guys that almost lose their homes waiting for a feature to come back. And I didn't do that. I made good money. I got a divorce and gave it all away, but I made it.
Well, when people disparage television work, you can just show them your Emmys.
That's right. Well said. That's exactly right.
No Academy Award.
Dan, is there anything else that you think that we should cover before I start to wind down with you guys?
No, I think we've kind of covered just about everything. The one thing is, I do feel like there's a bit of there is a certain amount of ageism in the industry that I think is unfortunate, because I mean, and it might be nice to have Don tell a story about, like, you know, working on projects where, you know, they've got guys half his age who are like, oh man, I'm at the 8th hour. I better kind of, you know, I better call it a day. And, you know, he's on hour 12, 13, 14. And he's like, hey man, let's just keep going. And so I don't know, I just think it might be nice to be able to address that a little bit.
I just did a project. I'm not going to name the project because it's not out. It's not, I don't know if it's ever going to be out or whatever, but two women, one produced it and one directed it. They had 2 days that they needed to finish the film. And they had another cameraman that wasn't available. And a friend of mine who was producing it, not the whole show, but the 2 days, he came to me and he said, you want to work a couple of days on this film with these two women? And I said, sure. Because to me, when they say you want to go to work, it's like getting an upper. I'm ready to go. I still like doing what I do. And I said, yeah, I'd like to meet with them. So we met and they said, the cameraman we had just argued about every shot. And we just had one really miserable time with him. And we don't want to go through that again. And I said, let me clear the air here. You're the boss. I'm the cinematographer. I might make a suggestion. And a lot of times, some pretty big time directors have said, that's a good idea. Let's do that. And a lot of them say, no, I want to do it this way. You're the boss. When you say, no, this is the way we're going to do it, that's what you're going to give. So if I'm able to suggest stuff to you, I'm in. So they hired me, and I did 2 days, which there was a couple of days of, getting it together. And so altogether, I worked 4 days with them. And they were so blown away with our relationship that she just hired me again for a little thing that she wanted to show for getting another job. So we did a little work for her. And she said to the producer that knew me, do you think Don would reshoot this if we had a chance to redo the whole thing? And he said, I think I could answer for Don. Hell yes. And I would do it. And I don't know that it'll happen or not happen. It seems like a little doubtful that they would reshoot an entire, hour and a half, whatever it was, just to make it look a little better. I don't think the companies would do that. They would probably put it on the air like it is and doll it up the best they could. But anyway, it was nice to know that they were interested. If it ever went, that would I be interested?
Well, I think that's just a reflection of the work ethic. You know what I mean? It's just like, it's the creative process, it's very relative. And I know there's all sorts of on-set politics at play. Production can be really challenging, but again, I think it's the attitude that like John just said, like Don just said, it's, that's kind of the pyramid of production, right? You've got somebody, obviously the cinematographer is in charge of kind of what is on the screen, and offering ideas and suggestions. I think that is really key, but I think it's also the sense of, doing whatever it takes, you know what I mean? And I think that that way of doing things, I don't know. I think it's healthy. And I think it's really good for productions where people are like, look, I'm just grateful to be earning a paycheck and being creative. I mean, that is, I'll check my ego at the door. Mm-hmm. And I think that has a lot to do with, I think that's a through line to Don's work, is it's really about, it is about the work. It's not necessarily about the ego, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to get it done. And the energy that Don has to be able to do it. That's the thing that I think blows most people's minds, because, I mean, at 90, it is impressive, but I mean, he's been on set for, he's still on set. And so, I think that, I don't think I'd have that. I don't, my God, I don't think I'd have the energy to be able to do that. So
The only thing they don't like about me, being in my age is the ambulance bringing me to work every day.
Damn ambulance.
The work ethic and the integrity really shows through, and the documentary is all about what we're talking about here. So I want to make sure that people check it out. Dan, where there's this wonderful Blu-ray, where else can people check this out?
Well, my understanding is most of the streamers you can find it. I think you can find it on Prime. You can find it on iTunes. Yeah, I think it's on Vudu. Basically, all the main streamers. I'm almost positive you can just search cinematographer and the name Donald M. Morgan, and it should show up, and then you should be able to kind of click through to it. But yeah, I really do think it's a good character study of an amazing human being, and I think to me the other thing is, from a standpoint of the filmmaking side of it, and the stories I love the stories, but there is the sense of the respect of being a filmmaker, and I think film students would really appreciate this, almost this run and gun style approach to filmmaking, which I think, look, like Don said, he didn't get involved in cinematography for the art at first. It was because it was almost like being a stuntman. And I think look, we haven't even talked about it, but Used Cars, look at that movie, Used Cars, like that's an incredible film. And I would imagine you almost must have died 3 times working on that movie. Close. Yeah, but I would encourage folks to go and rent it or buy it. And it's the story of kind of an amazing man.
Well, I guess that's the best place to leave it for now. I'm going to put links in the description of this video so people can just click straight through and find it that way. Highly recommended. Mr. Morgan, I'm going to say it, you're a hero, you're a legend, you're somebody to admire and to respect, and I'm so grateful for your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Isn't that an amazing conversation? This man is so amazing. Words fail me. I'm on a podcast where I have to use my words, and my words are failing me. I have so much admiration. The integrity. Here's what it really comes down to. There is a certain kind of, I want to think how I want to say this. There is a certain kind of masculinity that is not about what you can bench press, and it's not about, your clothes or, what you drive or how how many women you have. There's a certain kind of masculinity that just comes from looking someone in the eye, being able to shake their hands, and just feeling a sense of integrity. And I really get that from Mr. Morgan. And I'm so grateful that Dan Asma was here too, because he's heard all the stories and knows so much of this history. He's been such a close friend with Mr. Morgan for all these years. Who better to tell the story than someone that was personally touched by the life and the impact of this man? So what a thrill, what an honor. Let's continue to just build up Donald M. Morgan, to talk about him in the comments of this. If you want to, however you're engaging with this video, I just want to celebrate. That's what I love. My videos, my content, my podcasts, whatever they are, I like them to be jumping off points for further exploration. Go dig in to Mr. Morgan's career. He went from film to television. We talked a little bit about the sort of the snobbery that exists in the industry between the theatrical product and the television product. But isn't that crazy when there's so much good TV right now, and it's as good as, if not better than, the theatrical product, but there's still this, oh no, that's television. That's not, there's this, and we talk about the ageism too. So I just think it's more important than ever that we explore the work itself, and we talk about it, and we carry on the fandom for this stuff. It's so important, because it's with us, movies are meant to be enjoyed. They're meant to be talked about. They're meant to be shared. So this was a real privilege for me. Guys, thank you so much for checking this episode out. Please continue to engage however it is. If you're watching this on YouTube, thumbs ups, subscribing. If you're listening to the podcast, subscribing. That's really the best thing that you can do. If you will leave a review, if you're listening to this on Apple, Apple Podcasts, please leave a review. Please leave a kind review too. That would be very nice. Whatever you can do to support this podcast, it is engagement that gets into the algorithm. Nobody really knows how these algorithms work, but what we do know is that they thrive on interaction. So whether someone, if they're commenting, if they're liking something, however you do it, engagement is what supports these things. So thank you for all that you can do, and I really do appreciate it. The documentary is Cinematographer, and please, there's links in the description where you can check this out. It's on all the digital, the digital video on demand platforms, and it's out there. You can get a disc version if you want it. And I love it. I'm so glad that I had this opportunity, and I'm glad that you got to experience it with me. I'm glad this happened. So I'm going to wrap this one up for now. We got so many interesting conversations coming down the road. Thank you so much. Take care. Until next time, I will catch you later.